Let's take a look at the different ways of masking your footage. So one way, pretty straightforward, is have your footage selected, and usually you'll be on this tool, the cursor tool. Just go over to the pen tool and draw a shape. And when you close that shape up, you'll see that it masks out a part of your footage. So where is this mask that is drawn? You can't see it in your layer stack, but if you go to your layer and you have this option called masks, you open that up and you see your mask one. And currently it's masked out this part of the footage and you can't see the rest of it. So if you want to invert that, if you wanted to subtract this part, just click on inverted. You can also go to these options instead of clicking that and change this to subtract instead of add. I usually use add or subtract for this mask. You can also feather the shape. You don't want it to be this sharp shape. You can go to pixels for the mask feather and left mouse click and drag to feather, and you see how that kind of gives it this effect. I'm going to undo that. I can go to the mask expansion and make this mask bigger if I want. You see the shape kind of changes, but this is the really basic mask. You can also click on this layer, and if you go to the shape tools, you can draw out a shape and that'll be another mask. And even here you can change this to whatever you want it to be. So I set it to subtract and it removed that shape. So you can have as many masks as you want on a layer, and if you're just making a mask like this, you can use the shape tool or the pen tool to do this. And then if you go to your cursor and hold down on this, like make sure you're on the layer that you're working in, you can move the mask, change the shape. You can also animate your mask. So let's say we have this footage and we want to animate the mask in different areas. We click on this little stopwatch in the beginning, mask path, and we have this shape right here. We can go somewhere else and change that shape. Make sure you're having the footage selected, and then you can change the shape of the mask. If you don't have your footage selected and you're trying to move these individual points, sometimes it doesn't work. So just make sure you have this selected and then you can work with those individual points. So if I change that shape, you get another keyframe here automatically. And if I play through this, you can see that that shape is changing through those two keyframes. An issue that comes up if you have the mask on the same layer as your footage is that your masks are going to move along with the footage. If you move this footage layer around, it's going to move the masks. To avoid that, you need to create your masks above the footage. To do that, I'm going to go up to Layer, New, and Shape Layer. And that's going to activate this option right here, which allows you to create a shape. You can also create a shape using the pen tool. I'm just going to use this shape tool. If you hold down left click, you can see other options that you have. I'm going to stick with the regular rectangle, and I'm going to draw out a rectangle. For this particular masking that we're using, the color of this rectangle does not matter for now. But as you can see, this rectangle is not really masking out the layer below it. It's not doing anything so far. To make sure that it is masking out that layer, we need to use the track matte column. And if you don't have this column, go up to the columns and right click anywhere, click on columns, and then make sure modes is turned on. And that will allow you to see this track matte menu. I'm going to go to my footage layer and I'm going to, in this drop down, select shape layer 1. And that's going to do something. You see that it's masking out this layer below it, and I'm going to change this. So now that it is masked out, I'm going to change this little option right here. So this is set to Luma Matte selected. I'm going to click on this box and that's going to switch that over to Alpha Matte. So if I hover over this, you can see that it says Alpha Matte selected. So what is an alpha matte? An alpha matte is basically dependent on the opacity of your object. So now this rectangle is completely opaque right now, and we have also, if you go to this option right here, we've inverted this alpha matte. So instead of working to add and only have this area selected, it's working as a subtract, and it's masking out this area where we have the rectangle. To see how the alpha matte works, let's go to rectangle 1. Let's go to fill 1, and let's change the opacity. So if I reduce the opacity of this, you'll see how it's now displaying a part of the pixels below it. So if I reduce that to 0, it does not mask out anything. If I increase that, it starts masking out even more. So the alpha matte is just dependent on the opacity. I could change this color to red and it's not going to make a difference. So if I change this to red, it's not going to change anything about this. Let's change this back to like a gray, and let's go and see what Luma Matte does. So a Luma Matte is a different kind of masking. So let's go back to this footage layer here, and let's go into alpha matte selected and click on that, and now it's going to be Luma Matte. So what a Luma Matte is it basically works on the luminosity of your layer, and that means that it's working with the white and black values of your layer. Right now this shape that we have is a gray. It's so when it's gray, it's not it's kind of masking out just a small part of it. It's not completely disappeared, it's not completely there. If I change this to completely white, you see that it's masking that out entirely. And if I invert this, it's going to invert that mask. So then it's a so inverting this is basically doing what we did earlier with the masks, using that add and subtract. So I can invert this to either add this part, or I can use it to subtract this part. This is how the alpha and Luma Matte works. So now for the Luma Matte, let's switch to Luma Matte and let's change this to a gray. So if I reduce the opacity of my rectangle layer, it still will reduce that masking. But when you're using the Luma Matte function, I would suggest keeping the opacity at 100 and just working with the color of this shape, so that you don't have too many variables to control. I'm going to hide our other masks, so I'm going to make sure that they're doing nothing and focus on this shape layer mask. And you can do some fun things with this mask. First of all, let's change the color of this back to white, just so we can see how the other effects work. Now, if you want to add a feathering to this mask, let's move this over a bit so it's closer to the center. And if you want to add some sort of feathering to this mask, you can go in and add an effect. So if I go to effects and presets and I type in blur, I get a bunch of blur options. So I'm just going to choose a Gaussian blur and put that on my shape layer. It appears in the effects menu and it also appears up here. So you can just change that to a high value, let's say 85 or something. And right now when you have repeat edge pixels selected, it's not really doing a great job of blurring it like you would expect it to. So I'm just going to turn repeat edge pixels off. And when you do that, it's actually blurring that mask. And you can, of course, make this as high as you want and blur it as much as you want. You can try out different kinds of blurs to get the effect that you need and work with that. Let's set this back to 0 and let's see some other fun stuff. So in the shape layer, you can also add some wiggliness to this. So if you want a shape that keeps changing, you can just go up to wiggle path and you can go down to wiggle paths 1 and you can change the size of this. You can change the detail, like how much you want it to wiggle. And now if you play your footage, you can see that this mask is wiggling. So there's a bunch of options here that you can play around with. You can add some randomness to this. So if you increase the random seed, it'll add more randomness. So it's not it's wiggling in multiple different directions. So this is something fun. I don't know how useful it is. It has very specific use cases. But if you play around with some of these effects that you add to this, you can get some fun masks that you can use if required for your projects. A useful thing that you can do with masks is adding them to the effects that you add to your scene. So if you have an effect like levels or hue and saturation, some color correction effects that you don't want to apply to every part of the layer, you can add a mask to control where you apply it. So let's see how that works. I have typed in level here and I've got the levels effect. I'm going to drag that onto my footage layer. So now it's here and I'm going to make a really drastic change. Let's just make it really dark. I have two masks right here, mask 1 and mask 2, that are currently doing nothing, and I have my levels effect. So if you're on After Effects, this is what you see. You'll see effects. You are going to click on effects and you're going to scroll down and you're going to go to compositing options, and you can click on that as well and see effect opacity. But right now the compositing options is going to do nothing until you add a mask to it. So I'm going to click on plus, and by default it selects mask 1. You can select mask 2 if you want, and you can control the opacity of this levels effect on that mask. So if I do that, you'll see that it does not, it kind of controls the whole layer. But let's kind of reduce that opacity to some extent, and let's scroll up, and now you see that the mask 2 has this little effects icon next to it, which means it's being used here. Just go to none and set it to subtract, and you'll see that if I change that effects opacity, it's changing for the background and it's not changing for that particular area. If I go up and invert this, you'll see that it does the exact opposite. So you can also just set this to 100 and you can set the rest of, and then you can just control the effect on this area, or you can set it to a different number.